Hi, I'm Melissa Walsh. I am a secondary education student in the New Literacies and Global Learning program. And for my creative synthesis, I chose to focus on how does student choice affect engagement in the classroom? The reason that I did this was because as I moved through my graduate program, I noticed that the more choice that I had as a student, the more engaged I was as well. So I kind of used my courses as methods courses. And whenever I learned something about student choice and how that might help student engagement, I then incorporated it into my classroom. So throughout my project, you'll see different coursework that helped to educate me about choice, including areas of literature, writing methods, research topics, projects and presentations, and even technology tools. And I give you examples of student work that I've actually implemented in my classroom. You can learn a little bit more about me on my homepage or read about my abstract and why I chose this question. My site is organized by topic as it relates to the English language arts classroom. So the first one that I focused in on was reading and new literacies. And I used content from both ECI 541, which is reading in the content areas, and ECI 521, which was teaching literature for young adults. I talk about how my definition of reading changed and how different students will connect with different types of media and different books. And a lot of that has to do with identity that, as Rudine Sims Bishop says, books should be windows and mirrors. And we've expanded on that metaphor and learned about different ways that they should connect with students and help students learn about other experiences as well. And one of the ways that I did that was expanding my own classroom library. And I chose to catalog them through BookSource, which is free to teachers. And one of the reasons I did that is because it allows me to audit by size, genre, reading level, diversity, and freshness of my titles. And it lets me know what suggestions are. It tells me about new books that have come out that are being published that I might want to add to my library. And it also helps me to see what ratings my students have given to books. They have given me positive feedback about books. They want more from that series or more from that author, or they connected with this, or they disliked it and what they disliked about it. So it helps me to communicate and really have data in my classroom as it pertains to free reading. And I also included details that go along with literary theory, which we focused on in this class. And I kind of did a deconstruction of The Giver, which is actually one of the units that was covered in one of our anchor texts for the classroom. And I include a rubric that I developed for my students, and then some examples of work. The next area that I focused on was writing and research, and I mostly talked about ECI 520, which is the teaching of composition. I talked about multi-genre research, which we learned about from Tom Romano's Blending Genre and Altering Style. And we were challenged to create our own multi-genre research project. So I created a Google site about true crime, which you can look at there. But then I also used this to develop and expand on a project with my own students. And I used elements from the digital writing workshop. The projects that you see here, which again are shared with student permission, there's lots of different examples, lots of different genres, but they were done mostly when my students were partially virtual. So using some of the elements for conferencing digitally was really helpful to me. I also talked about conferring through blogs, wikis, and collaborative word processors and how that changed, and also gave specific connections to why that was super important during COVID-19. A lot of times, if we did not have tools or platforms already in place, it was a struggle to find some of them. So really trying to focus on these tools and engaging with students to rewrite things and rework things was super important to me. So this was very, very helpful in allowing more choice and making sure that they were engaged. And I talk about some of the tools that helped me to increase engagement and increase choice throughout this, including Writable and Moat. And the project was given using Pear Deck. So it talks about that. The next area that I focused on was choice boards, which I investigated through a few of my classes. But it talked about how even when you don't want to give total freedom, like I did with the Giver project that I mentioned, anchoring your research in a choice board will help students to gravitate towards what they're skilled at and what they're interested in doing. So I provide my instructions that I gave to my students, and then again, some of the examples that they created in my classroom shared with permission here. The next area that I focused on was learning design and technology. I took ECI 511, which was an elective course for computer applications. And we did a lot about technology and instructional design, which was not something that was really focused on in many of my other classes, but our professor allowed us to focus in on our own research interests. So I had firmed up my engaging question by this point, and I completed an annotated bibliography specifically about student literature choice and how that can help to affect literacy engagement in the classroom. I also developed in this course an online training professional development, and I incorporated my school's One Book, One School program, which we're already doing at my K-8 school. And I did a professional development explaining Pear Deck and how Pear Deck as an application can give students choice even in the smallest ways, whether they're typing or drawing or writing out answers. And it increases engagement because it prompts students to listen and involves them. So you're not just lecturing to them, but you have them, fill buckets or vote in polls or ask them how they're feeling. And it's small ways and small choices, but even those tiny things can help engagement in our classrooms. The next area that I investigated was engagement with new literacies through technology, primarily through my coursework in ECI 546. We did a few different projects that focused on what new literacies were and how we use technology specifically in the classroom. And I learned a lot about new tools that were unfamiliar to me before this class. One of the projects that we did was called a Cool Tool Blast. And for this, my group members decided to create a Google site where we investigated the tool, and we grounded it in the EEE framework, which was directly related to this project. And we investigated Storybird and found it to be really effective for promoting student choice by using a unified tool, but allowing them to use whatever clip art or text or images or ways of telling about comprehension. It really helps their engagement and their investment in their learning. And the other one that was really important was my project-based inquiry project. And I looked at using Breakout EDU, again, centered in COVID-19. I had half of my students online and half of my students in person. And using tools like this helped them to be invested in the lesson, being engaged in the lesson. And when I was done with it, I gave them a Google form, which allowed their voices to be heard and helped them to engage in the learning process. It also helped to inform my practice because I knew what they liked and what they didn't like, and to see if the technology was effective. So there is a write-up there, and then also a video summary. Lastly, I talked about my global perspectives on choice. We read a lot of different texts in ECI 524, which is Theory and Research in Global Learning. And it highlighted different degrees of choices that students had and teachers have and schools have in their learning. So I reflected a little bit about how these books helped to inform my practice. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it talks about the absolute loss of choice and how the more choice that we can give to students, the more voice that we can give to students, that they are going to become critical co-investigators and they're going to dialogue, and it's going to help them become stronger learners. In Summerhill School, I struggled with this one a little bit because it is total freedom, almost no rules. It was a very interesting investigation, and it helped me to see a different type of schooling that we're not really familiar with here in the States. And it also helped me to see the benefit of, again, just utilizing unique abilities, leaning into your talents and giving choices over what you learn and how you learn generally makes students happier. And the last book that I talked about was Born a Crime, which is Trevor Noah's book. He talked a lot about his identity and how his identity played into his experience, which was really powerful for me. He made comparisons between the way that things are done in South Africa and the way that things are done in America. And it helped me to see the importance of choice and self-expression and honoring those things whenever we can, because it helps to empower our students as learners. And ultimately for this class, I did a final project where, again, I had started leaning towards this focus question. So it helped. My big takeaways from there were how when my friend Laura, who was educated in Canada, was given choice, she was more engaged. It helped her to develop effective critical thinking skills and challenged me to create opportunities in my own classrooms where students can explore their own creativity.